Welcome to this episode of the Fertility Podcast, which aims to educate and empower you on the next steps around your fertility. If you've just joined me for the first time, this is a bonus episode made for the Fertility Show as a roundup of what happened at their event in London a few weeks ago. So my co-host Kate Davis will be back with me next week, and I'll tell you more about that at the end of this episode. So make sure you listen through to the show notes. Be sure to follow me at Fertility Poddy online, and rate and review, subscribe and share this podcast to help other people who might be like you, wondering what the heck is going on when you're trying to conceive and just trying to find out a bit more information, because that's what this podcast does. It just shares expert stories as well as people happy to talk about their own struggles. And seeing as I'm now being asked to host things like the Let's Talk stage at the Fertility Show, I get to record the audio from there and share it with you. And that's what you're going to get, is a taster of some of the different sessions that happened at the Fertility Show. So first up was our Plan B session, which talked about getting your head around making a decision that you possibly had never had to think about ahead of trying to conceive. We wanted to cover donor conception, surrogacy and adoption here, and this is in like a 35-minute conversation. I'm sure you'll appreciate these are big decisions to make, and I'm giving you a snapshot, so please do ask more questions if what you hear raises some. Like I said, check out the show notes so that you can get in touch with all the people that I spoke to. First up, you're going to hear from Leyla Hutchings, who was diagnosed with MRKH, and I wanted her to talk a bit about how that made her feel when it came to starting a family.
Knowing that it was going to be challenging to have a family with that condition, what age were you diagnosed?
I think I was 24. So I was actually married at the time, so I got married quite young for that age. But so we sort of buried our heads in the sand for a long while because no one else was married, no one else was starting to have kids, and then slowly everyone else sort of started catching up and then overtaking us. And at that point we thought, gosh, we're going to be left behind, and we haven't even thought about surrogacy. I know lots of people, if they perhaps diagnosed in their teens with something called MRKH, which is the absence of a womb or ovaries, that they sort of always know from puberty what sort of lies ahead. But because I was in my mid-20s, I sort of felt like it wasn't really real. And so once we sort of then got our heads around it, then we had to sort of start looking at surrogacy, which we knew was sort of, if we wanted our own genetic link to the children, was our only route forward.
And you were quite ill as a result of some of the treatments that you went through, weren't you?
Yes. So I had one lot of conventional IVF treatment, after which I ended up in intensive care. And I must emphasise that is something to do with my condition, not to do with having IVF generally. So I ended up in intensive care, and they then shipped me across London to have an egg collection. And they managed to retrieve one egg, which then fertilised against the odds, was carried across London in a taxi to be genetically treated and tested, and then was put back into our first surrogate, and sadly it didn't take. But it's been there've been various situations where I have just been really unwell and thinking, what am I doing? Do I sort of need to put myself first? Even if we do end up with a child, I need to be healthy enough to be able to be a parent to that child, and sort of having to really think about what would be best, what the best way towards parenthood would be.
And you work with Surrogacy UK to have your family. Do you want to just explain a bit about how you found them?
Yeah, I was reading a magazine one day. I think it was something like Good Housekeeping or Women and Home, just a typical women's magazine. There was an interview in there with an IM, as we call them, intended mother, who had had her child through surrogacy, and it was an interview with her and her surrogate and the child. And I just thought, oh my God, it's real, because until then it was a really abstract concept. You sort of hear surrogacy and you sort of think, oh, all right, weird, no one does that. Is it illegal? Don't even know. And they made it all real. And so we went along to a social, which was really daunting. But actually, the minute we went in, we actually swallowed our nerves and went in. Everyone was really friendly, and it started to become something that was less alien and more probable. And you met surrogate children, and you met surrogates, and it was just a really nice way to start our journey. The whole ethos of Surrogacy UK is surrogacy through friendship, and they really do mean that. There's a few different surrogacy agencies or organisations in the UK, and Surrogacy UK is one of them. So it's all about finding the right fit for you.
Next up is Jo Payne. Jo explained what it was like picking up the phone to have that first conversation about adoption, having had failed fertility treatment. And you'll hear from Becky Cairns, aka Defining Mum, on Instagram. Becky talked about how she managed her emotions around the decision to use a donor.
I'm one of 7 children, so for me, I just thought I was going to be like my mum. I thought it was going to be easy as anything. And at first you just think, oh, it's, just unlucky. And then as time went on, we started getting more advice. I think we had a couple of IUIs and then did 3 IVFs. And the last IVF we did, we kind of made a decision that was definitely going to be our last one. But we were, as I said, also had been thinking about adoption anyway. And then when we went to a different clinic, because with me, I knew we would have 100% fertilisation, but when they went back inside me, it didn't work. So we did think about surrogacy, but everybody's different, and for us, we felt like, that wasn't our path. And then, so when we went to a different clinic for our last IVF, everything went wrong that could go wrong in this one appointment. And everything was screaming out to us that this wasn't our path. And it was for us, I think, that thing of picking up the phone for the first time at that time, it's now Doc Thames Valley, and who've got a stall here, but it was Oxfordshire County Council was part of that. And picking up the phone that first time and having that conversation about going down that route. There was somebody within my own family who was adopted. The grandmother in our family, she's my dad's stepmom. She was the matriarch of our family and the most amazing lady. We couldn't have loved her more. But she wasn't biologically related. She was much more grandma to all 7 children than my mother's mother. So for us, it wasn't about genetics. We wanted to have a family. And somebody my husband was working with at the time said to my husband, what makes you think your genes are so effing amazing? It was true. It didn't mean that what we wanted to do was have a family. So that was how we started down that road.
And I think, Becky, that's a brilliant way to kind of bring in you with your story, that realisation that you desire to be a mum is what it is, and how that happens. You kind of have to remove the emotion to a point, even though it is so emotive, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So a lot of people ask me how long it took for me to make that decision to use donor eggs, because I was never told that I couldn't have children with my eggs. I just knew it would be incredibly difficult. So we were given a 5% chance with my eggs, 50% chance with donor eggs. And it was a gradual process. So it took over 5 cycles of IVF where I started to think about emotionally what else I could put myself through, financially. And then ultimately, the question was just, what do I want out of this? And it was to be a mum. And I wanted to have more than one child. I was always keen to have a big family, and it was becoming more and more difficult to get that one golden egg, never mind more than one. And so, yeah, we were actually on honeymoon when I kind of really started thinking about what is it that makes a mum. And for me, it was all of the experiences that you have as a mum rather than the genetics, and having that similarity in how you look to your children. And once they're placed in your arms, I honestly think that none of that matters anymore. But at the very beginning, I was totally taken aback by the idea of donor eggs. I didn't even know that people donated eggs, never mind that people used them. It seemed like such an alien concept, the thought of my husband's sperm being mixed with another woman's eggs, and it does seem like that at first, but it's then just taking yourself away from the emotions and starting to think about, actually, what's the end result? And we're talking about plan B, and I often think plan B, I don't think of my girls as plan B, just the way in which we got to them. So they are always what we wanted. They're actually more than what I ever dreamed of.
Next up is Eloise Eddington, who has founded the Fertility Help Hub. And Eloise talks about her acceptance of having to use donor sperm to have her family, as her husband had a genetic condition. And I wanted also to know how her husband dealt with the situation.
I think it is generally quite hard for men to talk about male infertility, and they feel that it's not accepted. So obviously his pride was very bashed. He didn't want to talk to people about it at the time. He's done a 360 since I've been talking about it in this space, which is fantastic. We were also, talking about it at the beginning of our treatment, where we were picking a donor whilst my husband was having his surgery in New York, and we were calling it backup. And I hate that thought of backup, because that backup has made us the most incredible family, and we wouldn't change it for the world. If my husband had the option of now having his own genetic children, he would in no way, shape or form replace the children we have. So it's just wonderful how things can change for the better, and hopefully the stigma around it is changing. I think also with donor sperm, there's also a level of uncertainty around how many other donor conceived children are there, which isn't something we really had thought about. And suddenly I actually messaged the bank the other day to say, you know, what's the cap? What could we be looking at? Because our children are on a sibling registry, just to have some sort of idea about how many other genetically related half-siblings there could be.
What did they say?
They said it's capped at 25.
Okay.
Capped at 25 internationally.
Okay.
I know from looking at the sibling registry that there are 9 half-genetic brothers and sisters. And we've put our children on there so that at 18, if they want to contact them, hopefully they can. There might be some intrigue there. But as you've been saying as well, as you start to, you enjoy your children and they become their own people, the genetic factors just disappear and the concerns you had disappear too. But my husband was still, when I was pregnant with our first, he was still finding it hard to enjoy the pregnancy. He found it very alien, the fact that in his mind, I was carrying another man's baby. But once she was born, that shifted, totally shifted.
Good. It's good to hear.
This next session was all focused on solo motherhood, and you're going to hear from Professor Joyce Harper giving her views on the Fertility MOT, which is one of the ways that you can start to find out more about your own fertility.
So I am not a Fertility MOT fan. So I don't work in an IVF unit. Some IVF units charge patients hundreds of pounds to have this so-called Fertility MOT. As you said, I am co-founder of the Fertility Education Initiative, and on some of your chairs you will see a poster. We're trying to increase awareness about a woman's fertility, and we have to understand that fertility decreases with age, and around the age 30, especially 35, a woman's fertility really decreases. So my advice always to women, if they want to have children, they should just do this sooner rather than later. There is no magic test, in my view. If the Fertility MOT is a good result, then I think the advice is still get pregnant sooner rather than later. And if it's a bad result, I think it causes undue stress. And certainly there is not a strong correlation, in my view, about the Fertility MOT that's bad and a bad outcome. Women can still get pregnant even when they've had a bad Fertility MOT. So I'm not a fan.
So in response to Joyce talking about fertility MOTs, you're going to hear from Debbie Evans from Herts and Essex Fertility Clinic. Debbie talked about how surprised she still is about some of the lack of fertility awareness women over 35 seem to have when they do call up the clinic.
I'm still shocked daily in my clinic when I have women presenting in front of me, or an open day or an open evening, and they have no idea about how their body is working. They have no idea if they ovulate or when they ovulate or when they should be having sex. Women still shock me that they don't have that information. And these are women, educated women, well into their 30s, that I would think would have that level of information, and they don't. So they do present at our clinic because it's an easy option. They see the fertility clinic and think, well, I've been trying for 2 or 3 years. This is my first port of call. Of course, it isn't always your first port of call. You do have your GP. There are lots of other supports out there before you enter the realms of a fertility clinic. But you do need to know, have you got ovarian reserve? Have you got eggs in the first place? And have you got a uterus that is fit for purpose? So, if you do think about MOTs and whether the information or the results is good or bad, you still need to have that fact. You still need to know, are there eggs, and have you got a uterus that's able to sustain a pregnancy?
Also joining us on stage was Ilyia Wilson. Now, she wanted to talk about where she was at as Ilyia has made the decision to have a baby on her own.
I was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome at 15, so I've known about that for most of my adult life. And I had a fertility MOT a few years ago, and I discovered that my uterine artery on my left I have a thickened blood flow, so it means I will more likely have miscarriages. So I've had 3 unplanned pregnancies, all resulting in an early miscarriage, so it kind of cemented that that's why it happened. And so it means that going forward I can plan to avoid that where possible. I can sort of put things in place.
Next up is Dr. Zeynep Girton, and she's a lecturer in women's health at University College London. And I asked Zeynep to explain what we need to consider when it comes to freezing our eggs, as she's done a lot of research into it and has also spoken to a lot of women about their experiences of egg freezing.
Following on from what Joyce was telling us about, which is that fertility declines with age, but it's not always feasible for a woman to complete her family or have her children in her early 30s or before she's 35. There are so many women who are in a position that they're not able to do that for a variety of reasons, including, financial reasons, reasons to do with careers, and the most common one is that women might not be in the right relationship within which to have children. So there are lots of women who do need to buy themselves a little bit more time, delay the point at which they can have children. And egg freezing provides one possible technology to assist with that. But I think the most important thing to bear in mind is that it's in no way a guarantee. So egg freezing is an expensive technology. It's quite invasive. It's like going through an IVF cycle. And so far what we know from the early phase of women who've come back to use their frozen eggs to try and attempt conception is that only 1 in 5 of them have been successful in having babies using those eggs. So it's really something to think carefully about. I think we're lucky that we have a technology like that can help some women, but it's certainly far from being a guarantee.
Don't forget that you can hear these panel chats in full, so be sure to subscribe to the Fertility Podcast via your favourite podcast app, as we'll be sharing these as bonus episodes for you. And we're going to rejoin Ilyia, our future solo mum, after she's heard what the experts say when it comes to delaying starting a family.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only thing that scares me is like, oh, what if I run out of time before, because that's the fear. So in fact, with you talking about women not knowing enough, so I know my cycle. I've just learnt that, drilled it down. What I don't know is when the cycle starts to deteriorate. When is that going to happen? So it was only recently that I've had that conversation with my mum. Which was very enlightening, and I don't have to panic just yet with the whole genetic link. But yeah, I have built up that support network with my friends and family. Everybody that in my life is aware of my plans.
And have you put a time scale on when you hope to have
some
treatments?
So I hope to start, hopefully this time next year, I'll be starting to try to conceive.
So for your 40th birthday?
So just after, I want to celebrate my 40th properly, and then I'll give up all the good stuff to her. But I'm working on sort of like the exercise to get my body in the right shape.
And I know we're talking about obviously the importance of women trying younger because we know our fertility declines, but you don't want to take away the hope from an older woman who's deciding to go down. And we're saying older, not geriatric, aren't we? With that in mind, if there are women here listening who are wanting to go down this route and they're in that over 40 bracket, is there any more, I know, Zeynep, it's something that you've obviously had more conversations with women about. Is there any advice that you'd like to add?
Having worked with people going through IVF for so many years, it was really nice in my new research project to work with women who are having babies in their 40s, because I think, as you say, there is still hope. I think the main advice would be do it sooner rather than later. Don't delay.
Now, we know there's a lot of information here and that it can be so overwhelming, which is why we want to make sure from listening to everything you've been hearing, you know where to go for support. And next up is Anya Sizer from Fertility Network UK, explaining what the charity does to help you find the support you need.
Our perspective at Fertility Network, one of the things that we're really passionate about is the fact that this is a very vulnerable patient group. This is a group of people that are really desperate for something in their lives, and with that desperation often comes, and I speak as someone who's been through this, just that desire to find the missing component that's going to make all the difference. You want to know, if I take this supplement, if I do wear this bangle, if I go to this alternative clinic, everything will magically be better. And I've got nothing against all of those things. I did many of them myself, but I think we have to be cautious when there's a lot of money involved and patients are rightly really desperate for something to work out in their lives. And so, as the patient charity, we're really keen, again, to work with the HFEA and make sure that when patients are taking something on board, their expectations are realistic and that the finances involved are not just, overwhelming and an added pressure in this very difficult time.
I also spoke with Claire Ettinghausen from the HFEA, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, the government regulator of all clinics in the UK, to give you an idea of what information you can find out.
At the HFEA, we're the UK regulator of all fertility treatment in the UK, so any clinic has to have a licence from us before they can operate. And we inspect clinics at least every 2 years, and all the information about the clinics and the inspection is freely available our website. So if you come to our stand, you can look at any particular clinic you want, find out all the information. Particularly advice about treatments, like treatment add-ons. We've got a traffic light system, so people can come and have a look and see what rating we've given that based on scientific evidence. We've got some information about understanding success rates, and we've also got a guide about what to ask a clinic before you decide whether to have treatment there. What we try and do is really help people make informed decisions at what is a very stressful and difficult time in their life. So the sorts of questions we get can be kind of very general, like which clinic is the best. And the answer we always say is there's no single clinic that is the best for everyone. There's a lot to think about. Come and pick up our leaflet about the questions to ask clinics, and we can help talk you through a bit about that, and also help show you how you can use our website to compare one clinic to another. Other questions we get asked might be much more scientific, kind of what's the evidence base for a particular treatment.
Now we're heading overseas to talk about what it's like having treatment abroad, because at the Fertility Show you do get to talk to clinics who are based here in the UK as well as those abroad, and we want to make sure that you really do understand what it's like having treatment there, because it can be different and also a lot to get your head around. Now, Caroline Stafford, who is the Kitch Hen on Instagram, had treatment in Greece and talked about her experience.
We had one round of treatment at a clinic in the UK, which was not a great experience. Quite a lot of things went wrong, and we were left feeling pretty disappointed and confused, I suppose, about what our next steps were. And I think the decision really came when my husband and I went for our follow-up, and the consultant said they wouldn't do anything differently for the second round. And in the first round, I'd suffered OHSS, I'd been quite poorly, and I just felt if nothing was going to change and they weren't going to do anything differently, then I didn't feel I could trust them to have another round with them. And we did look at other clinics in the UK, but a clinic in Athens in Greece kept cropping up in conversation. We kept hearing a lot about it. And eventually I spoke to the clinic for a consultation, and I always remember the director of the clinic saying, the first thing she said to us was, there's no such thing as unexplained infertility. There just isn't an explanation that's been found yet. And I think that was the point when I thought, this is what I want to hear. Yeah, I don't want to hear, well, we'll just have another go, do the same thing and hope it works next time. So that was when we decided to have a go, and the next step was flying over and having a consultation over there with them.
And that first visit, how were you feeling? Was it quite daunting working out the logistics to go?
It was, but the whole experience was actually a huge amount easier than I initially thought. I remember first saying to my husband, suggesting it, and his reaction was just absolutely not. Why on earth would I go overseas when we can have treatment? Why complicate it any further? And as soon as we had our flights booked and got ourselves over there, everything was just, they're so well geared up for overseas patients. Everything is just so well organised, and we felt such a positive, different, welcoming approach from them that we immediately knew that it was the right thing for us.
Now, it can be a lot to think about going abroad, and Dr. Raul Olivares from Barcelona IVF wanted to put your mind at rest about what goes on.
What I would like to explain is that you should not be afraid of considering going abroad for a treatment, because the clinics who are used to work, they have it very well explained. We are prepared to first talk English. You're lucky enough that you speak English, so that makes things really easier for us. Then we have, for example, the possibility of doing first free Skype appointments at your home, so you don't even have to go to the clinic. We can arrange that appointment, and the doctor will have a chat with you. We can send you the prescriptions for the drugs. You can have your scans if you are considering IVF here in London. You send us the reports, we assess them, we tell you what to do next. And then if you are considering, for example, IVF, you only have to fly once to Barcelona for the egg collection, and then depending on when the transfer is going to take place, you can spend 1 week there, or you can fly back home and then fly again to Barcelona for the embryo transfer. And everything else is done here. So it's going to be like doing an IVF in London. The only thing is that you are going to enjoy a couple of days in our lovely city.
Now, the last session I want to share with you was a fab conversation I had with Vanessa Hay and Jazz Rabadia, who are both doing their best and amazing work to encourage more women in the BAME community to talk about infertility. First, here's Vanessa talking about what she's learned from listening and talking more about the assumptions placed on black women regarding fertility. And then you'll hear from Jazz about what it's like being a British Indian woman dealing with infertility.
I've been doing a lot of listening and research myself, and I think the consensus amongst us black women is we come from families and we come from a community where it's almost like there's an order of things. So you go to school, you get your GCSEs, your A-levels, you go to university, you get married hopefully, and then you have a baby. And what they don't realise is it's almost like all the others before that is a prerequisite, and then the baby comes straight away. But they don't know that some people, it may not necessarily have it easy. And I think the word for that is, it's quite a big word, but pronatalism. There is that assumption and that held belief that, you know, black women within our own communities and outside of the community are very fertile, but we don't necessarily have any issues.
And Jazz, that's something as well that you've started to talk about. We've talked a lot about community and how important community is, and especially when you've grown up amongst these people and there is this order of events that people assume. You've started to talk more openly about it. What's the reaction when you've actually come out and said, well, this actually isn't that straightforward and we have been struggling and this is what's going on?
I guess just to echo what Vanessa said, it's almost like I feel like I'm part of the same community. You know, life's plan is laid out for you. You get a good education, you find a life partner, you get married, you have children. And I genuinely thought that's how it was going to be, because that's how it was for everybody else around me. And, you know, big families are very much part of an Indian's identity. And so when you don't realize that dream or that kind of the desire, you feel really inadequate. You feel completely alone, you feel isolated. It's happening for everyone but you. And another thing that's really kind of, I guess, integral to an Indian's identity is community functions. It's family events. So there's no getting away from the fact that you are not pregnant, and there's no getting away from somebody asking you that question at a community event. So it is really challenging. Yeah. The one thing, I guess, for me, why I've been so open in sharing my story, and the one thing that I found, to be honest, I wasn't ready to share my story until after I'd had Dian. So as I was going through the journey, I was still very alone. And the one thing that I'd like to change, if I could do it all over again, is to bring people in a lot earlier on in that journey. Because when I did share to them the things that I was struggling with, they were there for me. And they had wished that I'd brought them in sooner as well. So whilst I actually was scared that the community would shun me for talking so openly about a subject that, you know, we don't talk about. Indians like to talk a lot, just not really about the things that matter. And so in kind of making this just a normal, and more of a normalized subject, I found people kind of creeping out through all of the cracks saying, oh my gosh, we had 5 rounds ourselves, or, you know, we've suffered 3 losses, or we tried for 10 years and it didn't ever happen, and this is how we're dealing with it. Like, all of the stories started coming out, and I felt like the conversation was changing just because one person shared their story. So I think that the power of sharing your story is just absolutely incredible.
So I really hope that gave you a good taster of what was happening on my stage, as I like to call it. The official name was the Let's Talk Fertility stage. But what I wanted you to get a sense of was the kind of conversations that we were having. And like I said earlier, we will be sharing those episodes in full on the Fertility podcast feed. So do make sure you subscribe via your favourite podcast app. And the Fertility Show will be back next year, the 6th to the 8th of November 2020. So keep your eye on fertilityshow.co.uk. That's the website. Tickets will be going on sale in the summertime. Now, to find out more about the people who spoke to me here, just check out the show notes for this episode, which are thefertilitypodcast.com/Let's Talk Stage. And you'll also see links to the different people that spoke. Please note that all of these people are being quite open about their experiences on social media, and would love to hear from you if you've got questions relating to what they were talking about. Now, in next week's episode, Kate and I will be speaking to Natalie Gamble about all the changes that have happened in surrogacy law and how she works with people to help them build families the non-traditional way. It's another brilliant chat. So make sure you don't miss it. Thank you as always for your support, and until the next time,